have a guest speaker, so I am honored to present with no further ado, Sherry Wilde. I know Sherry from the Ozark UFO conference a couple of years ago. And immediately when I saw her talk, I cornered her, and she could run, but she couldn't hide. I invited her to speak here. And so Sherry can introduce herself a little bit more, but thank you, Sherry.
Hi, some familiar faces. Thank you all for being here. It's a nice day, so I know when it's nice out in Wisconsin, we don't like to go inside, so I'm sure it's the same thing up here. So I appreciate you all giving up part of your Saturday to come hear me speak. I'm going to do my disclaimer. This is my story. I'm going to share with you things from my life, and I don't have any proof. Those of us who are abductees, we just never have any proof. The investigators get very frustrated because they want us to bring something back from the ship and give them an implant or give them something, a picture. I've had opportunities to do that, and I don't know, I just don't think about it. And sometimes I think it's because you're in a higher frequency, you're in a different dimension, you're just not thinking along the lines of trying to come up with proof. So it's my story. If it sounds outrageous to you, or if it doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. I'm not here to try to convince you that what I'm telling you is true. I just talk on behalf of all the people who have had encounters and who are still trying to come to terms with them. Because it's a life-changing event, and there's no place to run or hide, and there's really no support. So I try to give a voice to those people to try to reassure them. So it was 1968. So look around the room. Most of you were around then, but not all of you. 1968, I was 17 years old. And I was driving to my girlfriend's house. It took exactly 12 minutes to get to her house from my house. And we had a deal, we had a plan. I was going to be to her house by 10 o'clock that morning, and we were going to go shopping. If I wasn't there by 10 o'clock, she was supposed to go without me. We didn't have cell phones, so there was no texting, no instant messaging, and it cost a whole nickel to call her. So we set up that plan. I didn't know if I was going to be able to get off work. My parents owned a motel, and I didn't know, it depended on how many rooms there were and if all the help showed up, so I had no way of knowing ahead of time. But I got off, and I was on my way to my girlfriend Vicky's house. I was driving along in my powder blue Volkswagen Beetle, beautiful spring day. I believe it was May 17th, so we're coming up on the anniversary. It's a beautiful day like today. The sun was out. And all of a sudden, my car kills. I'm going about 60 miles an hour on a straightaway toward a little rise, and the car kills. So I just reach over and try to turn it back on, and it just clicks. So I turn the radio off, try it again, and it just clicks. I push in the clutch, try to pop it, that doesn't work. While I'm doing this, I'm noticing there's 4 guys up in the road. But I'm not paying a lot of attention to them. I'm preoccupied trying to get my car going. The car starts to slow down because it's going up the rise, and I'm frantically trying to get it started, and I realize it's not going to start. So I'm busy. I lean over, I lock the doors, roll up my windows, and the car is rolling to a stop, and then I realize it's a good thing that my car killed, because one of those men is standing right in the middle of my lane of traffic. And I'm thinking, what an idiot, just standing there. And he raises his hand, and my car rolls to a stop right at his feet. He walks, or he doesn't have to walk, he just literally just takes a step forward, and he leans on the hood of my car, and he looks through the windshield at me. The next thing I know, I'm walking into my girlfriend Vicky's house, and I glance at the kitchen clock because I wanted to make sure I was on time. And it's straight up noon. And I'm looking at it, and I'm standing there looking at it when Vicky comes flying down the stairs, and she said, "Where have you been? You know, we should have left without you, but the cows got out, and it took us all this time to get the cows in. And you're 2 hours late." And I said, I am not 2 hours late. I said, your clock is wrong. She said, you're 2 hours late. And I said, no, I'm not. And I ran into her stepmother's bedroom. I checked her clock. I ran upstairs. I checked every clock in the house. I could not believe, because 2 hours was just gone from my life. I have a diary that I kept. I still have the diary, and the entry I made that day was that I went to Madison shopping with Vicki, but I got sick and ended up staying in the car all day. So we went shopping, but I never thought anything of the 2 hours of missing time until 20 years later. All of a sudden, in late 1987, there's a UFO flap in my community. It was a hotbed of activity, the most active place in the world, and it went on for almost 2 weeks. Actually, the thing from start to finish went on for, like, for me, 18 months, almost 2 years.
What city is this?
It was Belleville. They called it the Belleville flap, but it was Belleville, New Glarus, Monticello. It formed Don Schmidt from the Center for UFO Studies. They came up to investigate it, and they said it was like a triangular area. They had all kinds of credible witnesses, police and professional people, lots of documented eyewitnesses that saw the crafts. There were lots of them. And my house was right in the middle of that triangle. So they came, the Center for UFO Studies came to New Glarus, to Belleville actually, to give a news conference. And my girlfriend, the very same girlfriend, Vicki, we're still best friends. She called me and she said, let's go hear what they have to say about this. And I said, I'm not interested. And she said, oh, you must be interested. You of all people should be interested in finding out about the UFO stuff. And I said, why would you say that? I have no interest in that. I'm not sure if I even believe in it. And she said, how can that be? All the time when we were growing up, you used to talk about that they were coming for you. And I said, what? And she said, well, don't you remember that time when you lost the 2 hours on your way to my house? And I said, yeah, because I had started to obsess about that. I had, like 4 or 5 weeks earlier, started to become very obsessed with that 2 hours of missing time. And every night before I was going to sleep, I was trying to replay it in my mind, thinking that if I fell asleep, I could see the guy's face, because I knew if I could see his face, I would know what happened to me that day. I was very disturbed that I didn't, 2 things, and I didn't know which one bothered me more. I was very disturbed that I lost 2 hours of my life, and there were 4 men standing in the road when it happened. But even more disturbing was the fact that I lost 2 hours of my time, of my life, and I had never once wondered about what had gone on for 20 years. Never questioned it, never talked about it, nothing. And then all of a sudden it became an obsessive thought for me. So Vicki said, that day when you were 2 hours late, you came in saying that there were little men in a spaceship and you wanted me to go back and meet them. And when she said that, I kind of had a flash and I thought, yeah, that might be true. And then she said the funniest thing. She said, they want to meet people who have had a UFO sighting and have missing time. And I said, why? And she said, because they want to hypnotize them and see if they were abducted or kidnapped by the aliens. And I laughed, and I laughed. And I said, Vicki, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard of. I said, that's not true. That doesn't happen. And she said, well, it said so in the paper. And I said, I don't care where it said it. I said, this is America. It doesn't happen here. I said, that kind of thing doesn't happen anywhere. I said, our government would never allow that. Yeah, I was 37 years old. What did I know? So that was the beginning of it. I went with her I changed my mind because when she said that they regress people, I thought, there's where I can get the name of a good hypnotist. That's all I wanted, was the name of a good hypnotist. Don Schmidt was the co-director of the Center for UFO Studies at the time. And he and I ended up meeting and talking, not because I thought I had had an encounter, but because I wanted the name of a good hypnotist. And he would not. He just would not give me the name. He insisted that he preferred it be them, but he wanted somebody to be with me when I was regressed. It took him a long time because I was not regressed until 1988, I think it was, maybe even 89. Because I just wasn't sure. I was afraid that because this is what they did, that that's what they were going to go looking for. He had to win my trust, and he finally did. I finally allowed and agreed to having them be present. So I went down to Chicago, and I was regressed by Stanley Mitchell, who's just amazing, one of the best hypnotists in the world, probably the best at the time. I apologized to everybody before I went into that room. It was a beautiful spring day again. I apologized for wasting their time. They had a psychologist there and people there, and I said, you know, you guys are going to feel like idiots because what you're looking for didn't happen. And Don said, we're not looking for that. We're hoping that you just, you know, had your car break down, these guys helped you get it started, and that's all there was to it. But no, that's not how it went. When the car rolled to a stop at his feet, I looked through the windshield, and my eyes kept trying to change what I was seeing because he wasn't human. And I couldn't, my mind couldn't accept that. And it took me a while. He had the typical, the big eyes, small nose, and the mouth that didn't open, and the skinny long neck. He had a grayish blue coveralls on. He had an insignia over his left breast. He had like a cap, a tight-fitting cap on his big head. And so I locked my arms on the steering wheel. I grabbed hold of the steering wheel and I put my head down. And I was shaking. I could feel my heart pounding, and I thought I was gonna die from it. And he was scolding me. He called me by name. That was what really creeped me out. He said, Sherry, we've been waiting for you. And I thought, who could this be? How does he know my name? And how could he know that I was going to be here when I only knew it 15 minutes ago myself? He told me to get out of the car, and I just hung on to the steering wheel. There were two guys behind him with wands, pointing them at the ditch, and then there was another guy further back. The two guys right behind him came over to the car, apparently. I didn't see this, but they came over, and each one of them grabbed a hold of me because I had my head down, and I saw this gray arm. It brushed up against me. I opened my eyes, and this gray claw-like hand came in and wrapped its long fingers around my forearm, and another one did over here, and they pulled me out of the car. As soon as they touched me, I stopped shaking, and I was just very calm. And I actually stood by the side of the car and visited for a while. And the main guy, I think he seemed a little bit bigger in stature, but there was something about him that I knew he was the leader. And I stood there talking to him, and he looked familiar, and I kept thinking, I know this guy. How do I know him? But I was just busy studying him, and I was thinking, how does that little skinny head hold up that big head? That little skinny neck hold up that big head. And his ears were fascinating to me, and his nose, everything was fascinating. I was looking at him. And then finally he just stopped what he was saying, and he said, okay, there's work to be done. And then he just turned, and he was just like gone. If you've been around them, you know how that goes, because they're from another dimension. So when they move, it's like when you have a black light, back when they used to have the discos, remember that? Yeah, it's like that. It's just like, so those guys, they had a hold of me, and they started walking me across the field. And I saw where we were going. I saw the ship, little silver scout ship, about 20 feet in diameter, sitting out. And I was fascinated. I loved seeing the ship, and I wanted to just stand and look at it. I didn't want to go to it. I knew, something in me knew what was going to happen. But I tried to walk to keep up with them, and I couldn't. I went down, and the ground had been plowed, and I scraped my knee, and I just gave up, and I let them just drag me then, because they were booking it. By the time we were only just partway there, the main guy, I call him Da, by the way, D-A, that's how I got to eventually know him as. he's already over by the ship, and he's standing there with somebody, and I'm thinking, oh, there's another human there. Looked like a woman. She was wearing a longer dress type garment, kind of a beige color. And as we got closer, I saw she had very thin brown hair and big almond-shaped eyes. She looked familiar to me also. I've since, her name is Aurora, but I didn't remember it back then. And she's always there when they come for me. So we get over there, and Dog goes up into the ship. I think he goes up first. And they tell me I have to go in, and I don't want to go in, and I resist. But Aurora is there, and she helps take me up the very steep ramp. And on the scout ships, when you go into them, like all the ships actually, it's cold, really, really cold when you go in there. And also, from the outside, it looks like I would have to crunch down because it doesn't look very big. But again, because it's a dimensional thing, you step into it and it's much bigger than what you expect. So I walked into it and came up the ramp, and there's a room with windows over here, kind of a little bit of a curve to it with a place to sit there. Right off to the left is a very narrow, I always wonder how they get heavier people on there because it's a very narrow slab of a table. And then behind that is like almost like a desk with a monitor, and then there's some, looks like binders or books or something up above it. And then there's a hallway that goes back with one door there with a window or a monitor, and then another door. And then I don't know what was on this side, but I assume the same thing. Then on this side is a door, the door into the cockpit, the control area. And that's where we stepped in there because she took me in there to get me undressed. And I tried to fight her, but she just undressed me, and I had to lay on the table. And it was the typical scenario. Aurora sits up at the head of the table, and she had her hands on each side of my head to keep me calm, and Da was down at the bottom, and he was pulling down instruments, and he had different things, and mostly they take DNA samples and things. They take skin scrapings, and they do things, funny things, squeezing your finger. And he was explaining to me everything he was doing. Nothing hurt very much, and he was just talking, and he said, "You've always had a weakness in your legs, Sherry, and good thing, we're taking care of that for you," and just talking away to me. And I'm good with it all. And then he pulls down this thing that has a really long needle on it. And I say, "What are you going to do with that?" And he says, he tells me, because he said, "We're going to extract your eggs." And I said, "No, you can't." And I got hysterical. And he looked at me, puzzled, and he came up to the head of the table, and Aurora stepped away, and he put his hands on my head, and I immediately calmed down. And he said, "Tell me, Sherry, why you're so upset." And I said, "Because I want to have children someday, and you can't take my eggs because then I won't be able to have children." And he said, "Oh, no, that's not how it works." And he gave me a quick biology lesson. And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "It's not going to hurt." So Aurora stepped back in, he went down to the bottom, and he finished doing it, and I watched as they extracted, and I watched this fluid stuff go up to this tubing. When he did that, the other guys, those other three guys had come onto the ship, and I wasn't paying much attention to them. They were kind of scurrying around. They make this scurry sound when they walk. Any of you who've had experiences, you know what I'm talking about. It's kind of creepy. And that scurrying sound, they do it even in the ship. So they were scurrying around, and I'm like, not paying too much attention to it, but when they took the sample, when they took the ova, they all stopped what they were doing, and there was a high level of anticipation and excitement. I could feel it. The energy in the ship changed. They went back to the hallway, and they stood facing that direction. So I'm thinking there was a monitor or a window there in that wall, just like there was on the other side. I couldn't see because I never got over that far. But I'm guessing because they stood in the hallway looking at something. And after Dot took the sample, he turned away from it, and he looked at a monitor, and he clicked away on like a keyboard of some sort or something, and waited a minute or two. And then he turned back and he looked at me and he said, "It is good." And then there was like a big, there was no sound, but it was like those guys were high-fiving each other. That's how it felt. I could feel they were all excited, so they were happy with whatever it was that they were doing with my eggs. So then he said, "We're done. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" I could get dressed, so I got dressed, and he said, "Can I ask you a few questions?" And his first question was, and always is, when I see him, "Sherry, are you happy?" And I wanted to say, let me get this straight. You came from the far reaches of the universe or our solar system or something. You fly to planet Earth. You land in a field in Wisconsin. You pick up a 17-year-old kid, and the first thing you want to know is if I'm happy. What about that? That doesn't make sense. But it did eventually make sense to me. It was one of the big clues to me figuring out who these guys were and what was going on with me. So I said, "Well, actually, you know, my life is okay, but am I happy?" I said, "Truth be told, I'm pretty sure that I got put on the wrong planet." I said, "I think I'm supposed to be with you instead. Can I just stay with you?" And he said, "No, Sherry, let's not talk about that. You can't stay with us." And I said, "Well, does God ever make mistakes? Because I think he made a mistake, because do you know what it's like on this planet?" And he said, "Tell me." And I said, "Well, humans kill each other." I said, "They make up reasons to have wars so they can kill each other." I said, "And they kill animals for sport, for just the fun of it." I said, "Killing seems to be what they do." I said, "They're barbaric, and I don't belong here." And I said, I don't know, you know, but I don't want to go back. If I don't have to go back, I want to stay here with you." And it turns out that I have that, I had that discussion with them a lot from the time I was really little up until I was probably 40. I kept asking if I could go with them. Well, that's not true, but not too long ago, in November of 11, I did it again. I said, "Can't I just be done and stay with you guys?" So that's how it went that day. He asked if I had any questions of them, and by this time I remembered who he was, and I asked if they would take me for a ride up in the ship, and that caused him to have a big smile. They don't smile, but he smiles with his eyes. And he said, "So you remember?" And I said, "I do remember." I said, "Why do I keep forgetting? Why do I have to go through this every time?" And he said, "You can't remember because it would ruin your life. We have to block your memory. It's for your own protection." And I said, "What would be so bad for me to remember?" And he said, "You'd want to talk about it, and you can't do that. You have to be able to live a normal life." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to forget this one." And he said, "Yes, you will." They walked me back. Oh, they gave me something to drink before I left. He said, "You're going to get sick. You've been here too long." He said, "We kept you too long." He said, and I've since learned that like an hour and 40 minutes is the most you can be with them if you're going to stay on the ground in the ship. If you're going to go up in the ship, that's different. But if you're going to stay on the ground with them an hour and 40 minutes, anything past that, you're going to get sick. And they gave me this thing to drink. One of the guys brought it over, and it was a glass full of kind of a yellowish vanilla color, and it tasted kind of like bananas and vanilla, but there was something in it that didn't taste good, but I drank it all down. But it turns out I got sick anyway later on. And he said it was from the differences in our frequencies. They step their frequency down, they pull my frequency up, and we meet in the middle, which explains why my car sat on that state highway for 2 hours and nobody came by, because we were in a different dimension. I always wondered about that. So having that come out was devastating for me, because I knew it was true, but I didn't want to believe it was true. My life was on track, and I was living a pretty good life. After a long, hard struggle of getting my husband through college, and we had our children while we were young, we lived below the poverty line for so many years, and we finally had the life that we had dreamed of. He had his business, I had my business, we had 2 great kids, we had a beautiful new home. Everything was, it was happening for us. I did not need these aliens to show up with this memory. When I walked out of Stanley Mitchell's office, I was a different person, but I did what is in my nature to do. I tried to rip it apart and find flaws and find problems and lies and some way that I could discredit it and throw the whole thing out. But Don is a very thorough investigator, and he talked to a lot of witnesses, he talked to a lot of people, he checked everything, and I couldn't deny the truth of what had remembered that day. It was coming back to me clearer and clearer. And once you open that door, what happened for me was that I was getting flashes, and they were literally like bombs going off in my brain. And it would be like, oh, so that's what happened that time. I had lots of time in my life where I had had weird things happen, where I had disappeared. I had missing time, where I'd just gone missing, where big blanks, where I'd wake up and there were leaves and twigs in my bed, and I couldn't figure out how they got there. Suddenly everything was starting to make sense because I was getting flashbacks, being on the ship with them, having them come get me, all kinds of things. And I was like, oh no, so it's not just the one time. Then I realized it's happening in real time. They're coming for me, and they're coming 3 and 4 and 5 times a week. It was intense. I mean, to tell you, it was a lot, sometimes twice a day. It was a lot. They came during the day and they came at night. I was with them so much I had to take off work. I couldn't function. Then it got worse when I realized that my daughter was involved. She was on the ship with me one night, and I remembered it. And I came back to the bed first, and they still had her. And even though they had me in a stupor, and it feels just like anesthesia, you're just so drugged, you're so heavy. I forced myself awake, and I went down to her bed, and it was folded back very neatly, and she was gone. And I yelled out to him, and I said, you better not have my daughter. You better not have my daughter. Bring my daughter back. And I heard him answer, we have her. She's fine. We'll be bringing her back next. And then they showed me a picture of her as if that were supposed to comfort me. And she was, I'm sorry to say, she was crumpled up in a heap up against the wall in the ship, in the galley. And that didn't make me feel any better. And I said, and I bargained with him, I yelled with him, I fought with him, and he said, we can't not take her. She's, this is the way it is. And I said, you can do anything you want to me, but you can't touch my daughter. And he said, I'm sorry. And I said, please, anything, don't take my daughter. She had just recently started talking to me about some confusing events that she was having. There were some times where she had had bruises on her, but I was in denial. I couldn't face it. I was having a hard enough time trying to come to terms with my own stuff. So when I saw the finger bruises on her, I told myself, oh, that can't be it. But when I saw that, I knew it was true, and so I did the only thing I could do then. I said, please, will you block her? Make it so that she doesn't remember. I don't want her going through what I'm going through right now. And he said, it is done. So a couple days later, I'm sitting on the back porch talking to her, and she's just got out of bed, and she's all sleepy-eyed, and she's like stretching, and she's rubbing her arms, and I see the finger bruises on her. Those 3 fingers that are there, and she looks at it, and I'm holding my breath because I'm afraid she's going to go, oh my God. But she looks at it and she goes, huh. And she looks at her other arm and she goes, huh, look at that. I wonder what that is. And she went back to her story. So she was totally blocked. She has since opted out of the program. She got herself out of it, so she's not participating anymore. But at that time, she was being taken as much as I was, or even more. And it went on up until probably, let's see, that would have gone on until mid to late 1990s, I guess. Let's see, I have to think about how old. We'll know have been right around early 2000s. So my husband left me because he couldn't deal with it. He couldn't keep his wife safe, couldn't deal with what was happening at our house. It was too much weirdness. The whole town was talking because my children had friends come over, and once you know it, they'd see the ETs. You know, they'd hear them. They'd stand out on the lawn. That's a mill ad, and that happens when they're standing out on the lawn calling your name, and when they're peeking in the windows like that. My guys don't do that. That's a mill ad, I think. So they were, you know, the military was messing with me. I had black helicopters over my house all the time. I had the men in black come pay me a visit. That was pleasant. Yeah, it's nasty. And so he left. He'd killed him to not be able to keep his daughter safe. He just wasn't equipped to deal with it. So after he left, I didn't know what to do. Every Friday night they came like clockwork, but they were coming during the day. There was a time when I was driving down the street at noon, and I remember thinking, why am I heading west out of town? I live east of town. I should turn around and go get lunch. And I was thinking about doing that when all of a sudden I was parked along the side of the road, 3 blocks down and like 2 blocks back on a little side street, and I was just parked there. I'm like, what am I doing? It just happened like that, smooth, seamless, and it was almost 3 hours later. They had picked me up, and it was now 3:15 or something like that. So that's how they do it. If you're not watching, if you're not alert, if you're not paying attention, they pick you up and have you with them for an hour, or 2 hours, or 3 hours. I've been gone as much as 8, 12 hours. And you're not even aware of it. You don't know, other than if you're paying attention to where the sun is or the sky. I didn't know how to cope with this. I wasn't equipped to deal with something like this. It bothered me a lot about my daughter, so I decided to kill myself because I figured that was the best thing to do, to keep her safe. I thought they were evil, and I thought that if I was gone, maybe they wouldn't bother her anymore. So I was crazy one Friday night. I'd sent my daughters to a friend's house, thinking maybe they'd be safer there. And I was in my car driving. I didn't want to go home because I knew they were coming. And I didn't have anywhere to go. My parents wouldn't talk to me about it. Nobody would talk to me about it except Vicki. And I had worn her out. She didn't know what to do about me anymore. So that was when I decided to just drive out of town. I was going to hit this big tree. I knew where there was this big tree. I started out of town. I remember that. And I was going like a bat out of hell, but I don't know what happened. The next thing, I woke up in the morning, I was in bed with my clothes on. And I thought I'd crashed my car and that somebody had found me and brought me home and put me to bed. So I got up and I went down to see if, see if my car was totaled, or was it there, or was it gone, or what, and it was just there, no problem. So, and I had no scratches on me. So all I can figure is that they intervened and they kept me from doing that. This world is a three-dimensional world. This is a world of time, space. Where my guys come from, they come from the 6th dimension. Time, space do not exist there. They can manipulate our time and they can manipulate our space. They don't live by the same rules we do. That's why when they come and get me, I always would ask them, how come when you come and get me, I can walk through walls? When I was a little girl, I kept trying to walk through walls. There was a part of me that knew I was doing that at night or during the day when they'd come for me. So I was always trying to walk through walls or stick my hand through it. When you're with them, they're pulling your vibration up. And even though I'm in my body, I'm still able to walk through walls with them. So I had to find out why this was going on. I was not comfortable with the idea that I was a victim. It didn't sit well with me. There was a part of me that just kept rejecting it over and over again. So I kind of went on a quest. Don finished his investigation of me in 1990, I think, early 1990 maybe. And during the investigation, he wouldn't let me read any books or talk to anybody or go to any conventions. He didn't want me contaminated. I was one of the least contaminated. I knew nothing about UFOs. I knew nothing about this subject. And he liked that. So when he finally released me, I started going to conventions, trying to get answers. But everything I heard at the conventions from the investigators was all fear-based, which fit into what I was thinking anyway, but it made it even worse for me to try to be at home alone and feel safe. And I remember when I was at a convention in Florida, I think it was the Gulf Breeze convention, when Bud Hopkins was talking. He was giving a speech and he was saying, we think we know why these beings are studying us, because they're taking children and they're purposely scaring them. And he said, they're taking children and they're showing them the earth being destroyed. And the child gets very upset by that. And we think that they do that on purpose to scare the child so they can study the emotions. We think they're jealous of our emotions. And I wanted to jump out of my chair and say, no, but you got that wrong. Because I knew I had had that experience as a child. They took me up, showed me the planet being destroyed. And it terrified me, and I started to cry. But I knew, somehow I knew that's not what was going on. They showed me that because they were trying to trigger in me a remembrance of why I came here. They wanted me to know that we were destroying our planet. And I'm not the only one that this is happening to. There are millions of us. They show this to 1 million people as children, and it impacts who you are and as you grow up. And you look at the planet Earth and you look at what's happening to the planet, you look at it from a different perspective. And I wanted to say, these guys don't have emotions, but that doesn't mean they don't love. As a matter of fact, when you're with them, what you feel from them is love. It's the real deal. Planet Earth, love is a different animal altogether. Love on planet Earth is more of it's kind of like an ownership. It's a contract. I'll stay with you if you'll stay with me, and if you don't cheat on me, I won't cheat on you. If you do cheat on me, you're gone. With them, love is just unconditional, and there's no judgment. So I liked how that felt to be with them. So I always had a little bit of a different stand on it than what the investigators were telling me. They were trying to say that they were cold-hearted, that they had no emotion, and I'd say emotion is different. That's a more of a egotistical, that's an ego-based kind of a thing, because it means you're reacting from a place of fear. So I started to kind of go over in my mind everything that I had gone through and conversations I could recall with them. And I realized that everything they had ever taught me or talked to me about was of a higher purpose. They had never said anything to me that should have frightened me. They taught me the 3 important things to know. We are all one with our Creator. They taught me, they talk about the Creator all the time. They honor the Creator, they honor oneness. They live in a state of oneness. And I got to thinking, how can these guys be bad guys? Something's wrong here. It's just my fear of them. It's the fear of the way they look. It's the idea that they're taking me against my will. That's what made me believe that I was the victim. It made me think that this was them being the perpetrator, the bad guys. So they left my life in 1990. I think that's what it was. I'm bad on time. I'm real bad on time. But they left me alone for about almost 20 years. I made a deal with them. I was supposed to leave at that time because I fulfilled my contract at that time. But I had a very heated debate with them in my living room, and I was allowed to stay. So they left me alone for 20 years, and they just observed, and they did not come for me for 20 years, almost. And in 1989, when I was with them, then they showed me, or they told me, about what they called the great earth changes that would be occurring soon. And they taught me to be a light reader. And they did a lot of work with me during that period of time in 89 and 90 when I was spending all that time with them. They taught me that time doesn't exist, and they proved it to me. And they taught me how to manipulate time, which I used to be better at than I am now. But they taught me to be a light reader, and they said that's for when and if humanity makes it. Then you'll, along with many others, will be assisting in what they call the ascension of planet Earth. The way that it happened was I went into work early one morning in early 1990, and this guy came in to my office. He was really out of place. He looked like somebody from a Hollywood movie set. And he was, very distinguished looking. And it was 7 o'clock in the morning. I went in just to get some, be alone and get some work done. Looking back on it now, I realize what really happened here. But this guy came walking in, and he said, "Can I ask you a few questions about real estate?" And I said, "Sure." And when I stood up and introduced myself, and he put his hand across my desk, I looked into his eyes, and when I looked into his eyes, I said, "You will be going. You will be going." And I almost said the words. And I was like, what in the world does that mean? He asked like a really simple question. Then his wife came in, and she was also very beautiful and perfect, and he introduced me to her, and I shook her hand and did the same thing. And I looked into her eyes, and I said, "Well, you'll be going." Or wait a minute, "You'll be staying." It's always the opposite. "You'll be staying." And then when they left my office, I stood by my desk, and I was like, I shook my head, and I said, "What the hell was that all about?" And then I heard Da say, he said, "You're training to be a light reader." And I said, "Why? What is that?" And he said, for 2.5 days, when you look into a person's eyes, you will be able to see their frequency, their light reading. He said, "This is to assist us when the time comes, when the great earth changes occur. There will be those who will be having trouble deciding if they want to go or stay." And he said, "Those with a high light reading will stay." It's always the opposite of what I think. Well, they will stay. Because I said, with those with a high light reading, why would they stay and go through the destruction of the planet? I didn't get that. But what I didn't realize was that the timeline had changed, and planet Earth was not going to wash herself clean of her children. So those who had a low light reading would be going. They'd be going. And I said, "Where are they going?" And he said, "They will be taken to another 3-dimensional planet, or with a planet that resonates with their frequency." And I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "What?" And then I did the usual thing I did. I said, "Does God know you're doing this?" I said, "You can't do this." I said, "You're going to split up families?" I said, "How are they going to? You can't do that. What about my children?" I said, "Just so somebody who's not got the right frequency, they got to go to another planet." I said, "You're going to load them up on spaceships?" I had all kinds of questions came tumbling out of my mouth. And he said, "You know all you need to know for now, Sherry." And I said, No. I said, "You tell me about my children, you tell me about my family." And he said, "You know all you need to know, and you will not be able to read your family's light readings." And I couldn't. But all day long, and it was really cool. I really liked it. I got to, everybody I met, I could read, and I got an automatic, "You will stay or you will go." So that happened in 1990. So 20 years are gone, 2009 more or less, they come back. I'm 20 years older. I think it's getting close to my, how old would I have been? Getting pretty old, 60th birthday or something. And he shows up in my bedroom, and I must have been in an altered state because I was as calm as could be. I opened my eyes and he's right there. And I say, "Whoa, what are you doing back here?" And he goes, kind of insulted, like he's like, "What? We told you about the great earth changes. We told you that that you would be assisting us when that occurred." He said, "And we're in the midst of that now. There's work to be done." And I said, "Oh," so I said, "Did humanity make it?" Because back in 1990, when they were training me to be a light reader, he said, "Right now it doesn't look like enough of humanity is going to make it. They're not going to awaken enough. Their frequency isn't going to get high enough." But he said, "Those that do will go, but most of humanity will be taken off the planet." And so I said, "So does that mean most of humanity made it?" I said, "Do I get to do the light reading thing?" Because I pictured myself standing somewhere along with, thousands, hundreds of thousands, a million other people, and just these rows and rows of people, come by, "Okay, you're going to go, you're going to stay." But he burst my bubble. He said, "Oh, we already did that." And I said, "When?" And he said, and he gave me a date. November, I think it was like November 9th, something, and or something like that. And he said, and I said, how was it done?" And he said, "Well, time as you know it was suspended, and every soul on the planet, and in the astral and off the planet, all the souls, every soul consulted with their higher self and decided if they were going to stay with planet Earth or go, based on their frequency. But there were many were close to the mark, and they needed assistance. Should they go for it? Do they think they can awaken in time?" And he said, "We assisted them in making their decision." He said, "But even so, they can always change their mind. Anyone can awaken just like that, and their frequency can go up." And I said, "Okay." Again, I'm like, I don't get any of this. And he knew that, and so then he dropped. They do downloads. I mean, you've probably heard people refer to those downloads. That's a good word for it, because I said, I don't get what's going on, and he's dropped it. And I could tell from the twinkle in his eye that he was going to be mischievous, because he dropped it into my mind. And it was absolutely staggering. I wish I could have hung on to all that information. I knew everything. He showed me everything about planet Earth and what was going on, but it was too much for me. It overloaded all my circuits, and he pulled it back out. And he said, "You don't really need to know any of that, Sherry." And I said, "But it's so interesting." And he said, "But you don't need to know it." And I said, "Well, what's next?" And he said, "You'll know." And I said, "What's going to happen to planet Earth?" And he told me that, now this was in 2009, he said, as the frequency goes higher, anything that does not resonate with that frequency will fall away. It will have to change. He said, so you will see your government, your financial institutions, your medical profession, everything. He said, if it's not coming from a place of pure love, if it isn't, if it's corrupt, he said, it won't make it. It has to fall away. He said, so there's going to be a lot of crumbling taking place, and a lot of devastation. A lot of people are going to lose their life savings. A lot of people are going to go through hard times. A lot of people are going to get sick. There's going to be a lot of wars. There's going to be a lot of devastation. There's going to be a lot happening on planet Earth. But he said, you can't be afraid. And he said, we're going to start raising your vibration now. And he said, we're going to come back frequently to do that, because we want you to be ahead of the curve so that you can help those coming behind you, because it's going to be hard on your body. And it was. And so I went off to the desert because the recession hit the recession had hit by that time. And I found myself, without any forethought, going off to the desert. And I wrote the book. Well, somebody wrote the book. It came through me. I had people want to write about my experiences, and I had them try to put it in some kind of an order that made sense, and it's a little overwhelming to try to do. But I sat down when I was in Arizona. I sat down one day and I was typing on my computer, and I didn't know what I was typing. And it's like I woke up and I was like clicking. I'm like, what am I doing? I usually just do emails or work, but I was typing on a blank page, and I looked at it and I read the last paragraph, and I saw what it was about, and I said, oh no. And I heard him say, oh yes. And I said, no, I'm not, this is my dirty little secret, I am not, And he said, it's time. And I said, no. And he said, you will do this. You must do this. And so I went back to the beginning of it, and it was called The 3 Important Things to Know at that time. And I started reading it. And I said, this ain't bad. I can't take any credit for it. It just came through. So every day I wrote for 6 to 8 hours every day. The book came out in no time flat, with no notes, no thought ahead of time. It just showed up. And it was done, I think, in the only way it could be done, to try to have it so you can read it and have it make sense, because there's a lot of different, it's my whole life, and there's a lot of layers to it. So the book came out, and I said, well, this is good that I have this now, and I'll put it away someplace safe, so that someday when planet Earth and humanity have contact with the ETs, my great-great-grandkids will know that I had contact. And Da said, no, it's going to be published. And I said, no, it is not. You can't argue with him. He called in the big guy. I really was fighting it, because my daughters were, well, my oldest daughter was not talking to me at the time, and I knew that this would be the final nail in the coffin. And my youngest daughter was very tenuous with her. And I knew if they found out I was going to publish this book, that they would never talk to me again. I had a real estate business that I was hoping to resurrect when the recession was over, and having integrity is important in that business. And I live in a community of 2,500 people. And you can't be talking about aliens and then go out and try to sell real estate the next day. But this one really shocked me. He called out some big guns. I didn't expect this. Archangel Gabriel, I didn't know if I even believed in archangels, but that's who came calling and said, this book needs to be published. You have to publish the book. Allow it to be published. And so I said, fine, okay. So I said, I don't know how to do whatever you do to get a book published. So I Googled it, and it said you do a book proposal. So I Googled, how do you do a book proposal? So I sat at my computer, and I, in a very resentful manner, pounded out a book proposal. Put together this, and you'll see that this book is not going to get published. I tried, I'm sorry. And that's what I did, and I sent it off to 6 publishers, and 2 of them took it. So I was stuck. I ended up with Dolores Cannon, and 3 months after it was published, it was optioned to be made into a movie. So it's apparently was meant to be, and it hasn't affected my life as far as my business goes. I have support, and that's what I told them. If I'm going to do this, you need to help me financially. You have to be of assistance to me. You have to be there for me, because it's too much for me to run a business. And then, because I travel all over the United States and Canada talking. And there's no money in books, let me tell you. I told him, I said, it'd be nice if you could sell 1 million of them, because I make $1 a book. And I'm like, if you really want to help me out, sell 1 million. So then I could give up my real estate business. But they do have support, and everything has been guided by them, and I feel supported by them. The name of the book, The Forgotten Promise, comes from the book was going to press, and it was Mother's Day, I think 3 years ago, it must have been now. And my youngest daughter, we spent, much to my surprise, we took the day and we went hiking, and we went on a picnic, and we had a really nice day together. At the end of the day, I felt safe enough with her. I thought we were doing okay, so I had to tell her about the book because it was going to come out. And I told her, and she said, that book gets published, I'll never speak to you again. And I said, no, please don't do that, to me. And she said, I mean it, Mom. Don't you dare, because she also works as a realtor in our small town. And she's very sensitive about her reputation and about her name. So I went home and I told my significant other, I'm going to call Dolores tomorrow and I'm going to pull the contract. I'm not going to allow her to have the book published. And Jim said, are you sure? He said, can you do that? And I said, I'm going to do it. And he said, you better think about this. He said, I think you're meant to have that book go to print. And I said, it's my life. I'm not going to sacrifice my last relationship with that, with my youngest daughter. It's bad enough I lost my oldest one. And he said, well, why don't you sleep on it tonight and think about it? And he left. 2 o'clock in the morning, guess who shows up at my house? And he says to me, Sherry, have you forgotten your promise? And I said, no. And he said, you took a vow. And I said, I know. But I said, you asked too much. And he said, you have to think of the greater good. And I said, can't I just this one time think about me? And I said, I don't want to give up my daughter. And he said, you cannot acquiesce to her demands. She will lose respect for you. And he said, if I could show you the future, he said, you will see that. He said, you have to let the book be published. And I said, okay. And so the name of the book became The Forgotten Promise. So that's where it comes from.
Let's take about a 10-minute break here and then go back and Sherry's got lots of interesting, fascinating stuff for us here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you. I just gave this talk down in Arkansas, so if you were there, you might have, it's going to be a little bit familiar. So the esoteric nature of being a volunteer, Julia Cannon invited me back to their conference and they wanted me to talk about something a little bit different. And I wanted to go back because I love speaking down there. That conference is one of just the most wonderful conferences. So I said, yeah, that I'd come up with a different talk. And so I told my guys, I was like, you want me to talk, so I'm going to go down there and talk. I was like, what am I supposed to talk about? Because I can't think of anything. I don't know what I should talk about. And Da said, the esoteric nature of being a volunteer. And I said, hey, cool, I like that. What the hell does it mean? And so I sent that off to Julia and I said, yeah, I'll talk. And the title of my talk is The Esoteric Nature of Being a Volunteer. And I waited for the download because that's how it works. And it didn't come, and it didn't come. And my significant other, Jim, he's like, did you get that download yet? And I was like, no. Conference is like 3 weeks ago away, and I got to do a PowerPoint. And I was like, hey, where's the download? I need the download. And I do just get this kind of like this energy of like a grin from him. And then finally I got mad, and I was like, you guys want me. I'm doing all this traveling at my own expense, and it's, and you want me to do this? I said, because that's what they always give me a download. It used to be that I would the first couple times I did it, it was scary. They actually made me wait until I stepped up on the stage. When they were miking me up is when I would feel them come like in between my shoulder blades. I would literally feel them come into my body. The first, I would say 4 lectures I gave, they did it that way. And they just took me over. People, if they were psychics sitting out in the audience, afterwards they'd come up and they'd be like, "Lady, do you know that you got like 2 little dudes right next to you?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." I said, "Do you know this guy back here too? He's always with me. My big guy, if you're psychic, you can see him. I've got my guy, I called him George. He's always with me, he's very protective of me." So they would download and I would just kind of let the talk come through me. So when they gave me the esoteric nature of being a volunteer, I thought that's what was going to happen. They didn't give it to me, and finally I got mad and I said, "Okay, I'm canceling the talk, I'm not going." And he gave me a look, and then I think finally it dawned on me, and I said, "Oh, this is the esoteric nature of being a volunteer, isn't it?" And he said, "Yeah." How many other people at the conference do you think go to their ET guys and say, "Give me my download, give me my talk"? He said, "That is the esoteric." He said, "Talk about what it's like to be a volunteer. Talk about what it's like to be you. You're not normal." And I said, "Okay, got that. Okay." So that's what I'm going to talk to you about. Let's see if we can get on track here. Already gave me my disclosure. So I'm just going to reiterate that this is my perspective. This is my take on what my life has been about and what I believe all of the alien abductions are about. Let's see if this works. So our scientists now know that there's something called a spectrum of life. I'm using the visual spectrum here, but there is a spectrum of life. We are energy. And in this dimension, the 3rd dimension, we have 5 senses, which seems like a lot, but trust me, it's not. You have your eyes and your ears and your touch and all that. There's a spectrum of life. Of that spectrum of life, our scientists are now aware that we as humans on planet Earth can perceive how much of it. How much of life do we really perceive? We perceive less than 1%.
You say about 1%.
Yeah, and some scientists say 0.005%. I think that's probably closer. So basically, 99% of life is happening, and it's happening around us right now. Because we are multidimensional beings, there's life happening in this room. My guys are here with me. We don't see them because they don't want to be seen, because it takes too much for them to be seen, and we don't have the capability to see them. But that's why if you see a ship or you see the ETs and the person next to you doesn't, it's all about frequency. It's all about your vibration, if you're resonating with the vibration that they are. And it's also whether they want you to or not. My guys, one of the things that they do is they project an image of their ship or themselves to you to give me peace of mind and to support me when I was going through bad times. They asked what they could do to give me comfort. I said, "Show yourselves to my friends." And they said, "Okay, who?" And I gave them a list of over a dozen people. They showed themselves to each and every one of them. Now I realized that they didn't just bring a ship in from the far reaches of the universe and put it on the path of that person. What I believe they did is they just projected an image to them, whatever that person thought a UFO should look like, or whatever they wanted them to see is what they projected. Because there was one guy, Garth, his name was Garth, he didn't get to see a ship. Everybody else saw one, and I said, "Why didn't Garth see a ship?" And then they showed me an image. I saw Garth's head, and he was sitting there staring straight ahead, and there were 4 little ships, like really tiny little, like 4-inch ships, and they were darting around in front of his eyes, 2 inches in front of his eyes. And Da said, "Some are not ready." So it tells you a lot about how the frequency and the vibration of the differences in our worlds has some bearing on what we experience. Let's see what comes up next here. Okay, and this is the part where I usually talk about what an alien abductee is, but you all already know that. So, and this is where I recap my experiences. So I'm not going to redo that. I mean, I have other experiences I could tap into, but let's stay on track with this scenario here. So being a victim of the alien abduction scenario, the purpose for me to write the book was to bring out the truth that it is not possible to be a victim. And that's what my big stick is these days. So here's what I learned. The energy around being a victim and the energy around being a perpetrator are the same. People get mad at me when I say this, but it's true. There can't be a victim unless there's a perpetrator, and there can't be a perpetrator unless there's a victim. It's the very same energy. You attract to yourself based on your energy. So if you feel like you're a victim, you need to look at that. This is a very important lesson to learn, because this planet is a planet of victims. And it's sad, because you're born into that and you're indoctrinated into it from the very time that you come onto the planet. Brainwashing goes on right from the very beginning. You are told what to believe. You're told everything. You're handed a bunch of labels. You're told to laugh at this and approve of that and disapprove of that. You're told it's a planet that is under the control of those who have an agenda. If everyone on the planet decided not to be a victim, they could not do that to us anymore. They could not control us. We give over consent either by allowing it, by being a victim, or by being non-responsive, by refusing to see or acknowledge what's going on right in front of our eyes. And I always use the chemtrails as a great example of that. So many people even, they refuse to acknowledge them. They don't want to deal with it. I've had people literally say to me, oh yeah, I've seen that, I know what that is, but I can't think about that. It's not there, I just ignore it. Because then they might have to take responsibility. So it's about taking responsibility, it's about refusing to be a victim. This is what my guys are teaching me. Volunteer, as opposed to being an abductee. This is what I believe myself to be. This is a term that was coined by my publisher, Dolores Cannon. So after the book was written, and right around that same time that I had the experience with my hybrid children, I was out walking in the desert, spent a lot of time. I had over 4 years where no business and no work. My business, I just shut it down. And so I had lots of time. So I was walking in the desert one day, and I felt my guys, I felt them close, and I said to them, why? Why have I had so much contact with you? Why have I had 1 foot in your world and 1 foot in this world? Why have I been with you almost more than I've been here? I didn't really expect an answer. I'd asked that before and not gotten an answer. This time I got an answer. I stopped because they do this thing where they can like play a movie. They drop this into your head. Some of you might have experienced this, where you just, it's like a movie, and only it's not in front of your eyes, it's in your mind, and you see it, and you just watch it. And I saw him, he pulled back like a curtain, and I saw who I was before I came here. And I saw myself, and I was an etheric being. I was living in a state of unity consciousness. I was living in a world totally different than this. It was a formless world, timeless. And I became aware that a call had gone out from planet Earth. This would have been back in linear time, 1947. For some reason I know that. So in 1947 there was this plan that was put into effect, because in 1945 humans had detonated the atomic bomb. And that changed everything. Gaia, who had held back her ascension, waiting for her children to awaken so they could go with her, decided she could wait no longer for her children, because the timeline showed that she would be destroyed along with them, so she may as well move on without them. So the plan, it's not really a plan, it just was what it was going to have to be, was that the planet would be washed clean of the humans. A tsunami, an asteroid would hit it, something along those lines. It had happened before. Lemira, Atlantis. So she had been waiting a long time for her children to awaken, and she had stayed a third dimensional planet way longer than was ever intended. But in 1945, it changed it all. But there are those who care about the planet immensely, including my guys. We have family out there. We all came from the stars. It's amusing to me when people say the hybrid program is disturbing to them because they don't like the ETs mixing their DNA with the human DNA. I know, I'm like, where'd you think you came from? You know, you've been seeded here. You didn't just sprout up in a garden. So we all have different DNA we're from the stars, you know, and we're from the earth. Our bodies are from the earth, and our DNA, you know, we were seeded here. And if you look at the planet and you look around the planet, you can see there's more than one race here. There's different races that came from different parts of the system. So I volunteered to come here. My soul family, they didn't want me to. They put up an argument and a fight. And that would be Da. And I said, I'm going for two reasons. My immense love for planet Earth. And because what a trip this is going to be. Whether she makes it or not, whether humanity makes it or not, it's going to be a once in a lifetime, once in a soul's lifetime to do this. I wanted to experience what it was like to be in form and to go through what was going on planet Earth. I wanted to be of service. I wanted to experience duality. I had never been in a body before. I had never experienced anything except unconditional love. So I had to go through training. Before I came here, I told Da, I said, don't you leave me alone. Don't let me get lost in that world. Don't let me fall so far into unconsciousness that I don't wake up. It's on you, man. You stay in my life as much as you can. Be there. Be my lifeline. And that's why they didn't leave me alone for very long, ever. They were always there. And they were picking me up and constantly reminding me of the truth of who I was so that I wouldn't forget. Yes, I would forget when I came back into this world. You know, the memories wiped clean, but I have layers to my life. I can tap in sometimes if I get in the right state of mind, I can go a little bit higher and I can tap into some of those experiences and remember those encounters. And I can remember what they told me. And it was like a bleed through. It influenced who I was. I was always a little bit different. I was always the one who questioned everything. I was the one who, even though I was 6 years old, I told my Sunday school teacher she was crazy. Jesus did not die for my sins. That's a lie. And why are you telling me that? So that's who I was, because of their influence. So I came here as a volunteer. It answered a lot of questions for me. By the time I walked back to my condo in Arizona, my ego was saying to me, yeah, that's right, Sherry, you came to save the planet. You're a superhero. You bet. But there's millions of us here. Millions of us, and in truth, all of us, all of you, are all here for the same purpose. We all came to be a part of this amazing time on planet Earth, and your soul wants you to wake up. Your oversoul, your higher self, wants you to wake up in the worst way. Because it wants you to leave this third dimensional planet behind. Whether it's your first time here or your 10,000th time here, it's time to leave. This planet's going away, but there are those who are going to want to continue on with a three-dimensional experience. There are those who want to continue on with not just a three-dimensional experience, but one of duality, one where there's still the perpetrator and the victim. It all depends on your energy. When they taught me to be a light reader, it was very clear to me, and he told me many times, there's no judgment in this. All will get where you're going eventually. We have to. We can't not get there. We are, after all, God. We are God playing in the universe. I used to say we are an aspect of God, but I kept getting corrected. It's hard to believe we're God, right? Some people don't like that. Church told you that's, what is that, blasphemy? We're supposed to be down here, God's up there, we're supposed to pray, and we're supposed to beg and earn our way back into heaven, and that's not true. Yeah, that's good, because that's where I'm at. This is a planet of reincarnation and karma. This is a planet of recycling. So this planet has fallen under the control of a race of beings who believe that you are worthless. And if you don't believe you're enslaved, then what do you do on Monday morning? Do you get up and go to a job that you probably don't like very much? Would you do it if you didn't have to? You live on a planet that's free. You should have all the food you want. You should have shelter. You really shouldn't get sick, in truth. But you should not have to spend your life working just to live. Do you know how weird that is? That's just the weirdest thing. I had a really hard time with that. I remember being 19 years old and working at the VA hospital, and it was a beautiful spring day out. And I was trapped inside, and I said, why? For $7 an hour, they get to own me? Somebody gets to own me. They get to own my life for $7 an hour. I want to be out there. I don't want to be in here. How is it that I have to spend my life this way? It didn't make sense to me. And you don't. It wasn't, you think your creator created you to live this life? You think your creator, think about your own child. If you have a child, would you have a child and then have them live a life where you have wars? Where you, as soon as, look at what happens. Your child, you raise your child with all the love in the world and keep them safe and protected, and then what happens? They say, you gotta go to war. You gotta go put your life on the line, and you gotta learn how to kill other people. I mean, think about that. How wrong that is. We just accept it. We just go, oh, okay. I guess that's the way it is. Patriotism, yay, America. When you start to realize the truth of what's going on, every war fought has been to line someone's pocket. It has nothing to do with freedom. I don't care what war it is. You put money in somebody else's pocket, and I'm not dissing on the veterans at all. They're heroes. They went off for the right reason. God bless them. It just breaks my heart. They should have been home cheering for their football team instead of out in the swamps killing people or being killed. It's wrong. Nothing gets me going more than this. But anyway, there was a system put into place to make you feel small and to make you feel little, to not realize that you are God. You're just here to have an experience. You're not here to learn anything. You don't have any lessons to learn. I catch myself saying that too sometimes. And I know that you can call it that, but you know everything. You just have to remember it. There's no lesson you have to learn. You don't have to come back and learn how to be more loving or reincarnation. When you get greeted on the other side after you die, if you leave here and die tonight, and you get greeted by somebody and they're like, let's look at your life. Oh, look at there. Yeah, you should go back, because you need to learn more about how to love and be more forgiving. That's not true. That loving being is working for the other side. Don't be deceived. You just need to say, nope, I'm gone, I'm moving on. You have the right to leave this dimension, but we've been trapped by that game of karma. I was in it for a while, I believed it made sense. I'm like, yeah, okay, I can get that, I get that. But the truth is, you came here originally to live a life, to learn to be a co-creator, and to have the 3D experience. But the duality came in later when the fear came onto the planet. And there was what the religions talk about, the fall. So that's okay. I mean, it's okay because we came here to experience, and you can experience anything you want. But the problem is we got stuck in that lower frequency, and the fear took over. And this is now a planet that is just, it's almost totally based in fear. Trying to come onto a planet like this and awaken people who don't even know they're asleep is a tough job. But the Pleiadians, those younger kids coming on, they're making a big difference. My group, I came in 1950. The first wave of volunteers that came in, we had, I'm not gonna feel sorry for myself, but I mean, we had it pretty tough. I had 2 years of training, in linear time, but I had to train before I came here, but nothing could have prepared me. I remember as I was a newborn infant in the crib, I was standing by it with Dad. He came, because he didn't want me to come here, And so there I am, that little body, and I'm standing there, and he said, so, happy with your decision? And I said, no. I'm not going back in there. I said, you have no idea. And he said, you've got no choice. And I said, oh my God. I said, I don't know what I was thinking.
What was I smoking when I decided this?
I know. It was tough. A lot of the volunteers, have left. Some of them left right away. Some of them, it's tough. And a lot of us came from higher frequencies. We had no idea. So that's what's going on with the volunteer program. After I got back to the condo, somebody had sent me an email, and attached to it was a video Dolores Cannon had done. And I'd never heard of her before. And they said, yeah, listen to this. I turned it on, and she was talking about the volunteer program. That's how it works. I was just shown that that's what I was. They called me a participant in a program, is what Doc called me. He said, you're a participant in a program. You signed up to come here. I get back there, and there's Dolores saying, there's the 3 waves of volunteers. First wave came in the late 1940s. And I'm like, wow. But as I wake up, I remember picking my birth date, December 25th, 1950. I remember picking it because it gave me the attributes and the gifts that I needed for coming onto planet Earth. And again, I better check my little thing here to see where we're at, see if I'm on track with all this. Okay. This is where I get to talk about Einstein, because this world is a world of illusion. Even Einstein said so. Reality. I have trouble when I talk about this being a holographic world. But we are holograms. We are, in truth, an idea in the mind of God. We're an idea. We're energy. But because we all share the same mind, and people don't like this part either because they don't like the ETs, it bothers them that they all seem to have that hive mentality. Well, that's where we're going. We're going to have that same thing, but I can tell you that that's a good thing. That's where I came from. And it's wonderful to have that connection and that oneness instead of being a singular body, thinking that you are separate and alone. I'm guessing that everybody in this room at one time or another has felt abandoned and alone. And you've wondered if there's anybody there who really cares about you. Anybody there who really knows you, or if they really knew you, would they love you? When you're part of unity consciousness, you know you're loved. You just live in love. So this world is an illusionary world, and as soon as enough people wake up in it, it will fade away. And the real world is way better than this. Trust me. There's no comparison. I gotta find where I'm at. Let's see. So when I signed up to come here, 1947, I volunteered. 1950, I came in on that stream of energy. And I said, I'm not coming onto this amusement park, onto this planet to ride the teacups. I'm not going to just sit there and be passive. I want to ride the biggest and the baddest roller coaster there is. So I programmed my life just like you programmed your life before you came here. That we do. We have contracts and we program our life. And I have had an amazing life. I have climbed to the top of the mountain and then I have fallen off of it. I have had highs and lows. I've had experienced every human emotion there is. And it's been an experience. I want it. My one trip to planet Earth, I wanted it to be memorable. And it's been memorable, trust me. So it's not a typical life, is what I'm told. There I am. Roller coaster. So being born on December 25th, a lot of people also have problems with that, but Joshua is one of those in charge of the ascension of planet Earth. And I picked that date because it gave me the attributes I needed, but also because it was in honor of the day that you honor his birthday. And he's there. He's there. He's one of those working with the Arcturians on the ascension of the planet. And so I needed to have certain things in my makeup which made me a little bit different. So one of the things that my birth date gave me, I'm a double 7 if you're into numerology. That's a person who questions everything. But I also, I'm fearless. Other than early on in the abduction experience, I had a lot of fear of that. But once I got past that, and that's probably the only thing in my life that ever caused any fear for me, other than if someone were to do something to my children, I suppose that would also be my motherly instincts. But pretty much I'm fearless as far as going out and talking about this, because I don't care what people think about me. And that I noticed early on in my life, even when I was a teenager. I had one incident that showed me what it was like. I had a crush on a boy when I was 15 or 16. And I got all wrapped up in it, and I cared what he thought about me. And I did not like how that felt. And I observed that, and I said, I'm not doing that again. And I didn't, and I don't. It doesn't bother me. I've had people stare at me in my hometown as I'm walking down the street. One guy drove his little car right up into a lamppost. Yeah, I thought it served him right. I mean, I don't know if he thought I was going to start glowing, but you know, my kids were talking and their friends were talking about the ETs at the house, and the ships were being seen above my house. It's a small town, and that kind of stuff gets a lot of attention. But lately, as far as I know, since the book came out, if people are talking or laughing, I'm not aware of it. If I'm aware of it, I could care less. It doesn't bother me. You know, if they have an issue, then they have an issue. I think a lot of it has to do with me not caring if you believe me or not. It doesn't matter to me if you believe me, because I know that those who are ready to hear and have something positive they can take away from what I say, they're the ones I'm talking to. And if they don't get anything out of it, then it's not for them, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm unattached to any of that outcome. So what's up next? I don't have my glasses. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about some stories, tell you some stories from my life.
Plenty of time.
Yeah, we got time? Okay. So, during the 20 years that they stayed out of my life, I made a pact with them. If you read my book, I didn't put this in the book because I didn't have clarity on it yet. I was trying to get clarity on it. It didn't come until after the book went to print. But when it was right around the 1990 or 89, somewhere in through there, I was supposed to leave the planet. my contract was done. And I was supposed to go via a car accident. And I knew this. And I said, I'm not going. And the guys came to my living room one afternoon, and I left my body, lay on the sofa, and I got up and I stood, and there were three of us. Da was one of them. He was in his etheric body. And then another guy, I call him the master, and then me. And I made my case for staying. And I argued with him. I said, my husband just left me, and he's out of control, and he won't be a good father. And my daughters, they were, I think, 15 and 17 or thereabouts, 15 and 18. I said, they need me. And I remember Da leaned in close to me when I said, I can't just leave them orphaned. And he said, it happens all the time. And I thought that was really cold, man. And he said, well, and then he said something like, what makes you think that you're staying? What makes you think that you're staying would not be the gist of it was that it would not be actually more negative in their life, that it would actually be better for them if I were to leave, for their overall growth of their soul. And I said, I don't care. I'm not leaving my children. And I argued, and they finally consented to my changing my contract and staying if I would allow them to track me for 20 years and study the human condition that we call love, because they were fascinated by what we call love. So I agreed to that, and then I agreed to the book. So I got to stay. And so for 20 years they left me alone, and they tracked me. I was single at the time, and they chose. It's an interesting thing. I often wondered what was going on with me. They chose as I went from relationship to relationship. I would have a year to a 2 to a 3 year relationship, and I went through these relationships. Each one was like a stepping stone. It took me a while to figure out. It finally happened when I was in the shower one day, and I heard him say, okay, now you're going to have a relationship with a black man. And I said, what? Why are you telling me that? So what? I said, why are you telling me that? And they said, it's time for you to experience that. And I was like, why are you telling me that? I don't get it. But that's when I started to connect the dots. Every relationship taught me something about love and what it wasn't. Because that's the relationships that you have on this planet are probably as far from love, for the most part, not entirely, but a lot of them are about control and just kind of like a contract that you have with someone. There's very hard pressed to find unconditional love. But I went through these series of relationships, and I would want to stay. I got asked to get married like 13 times. I was always ready. I was like, nope, gotta leave, bye. So I had this angel, I call her an angel. I call her Angel Agnes. She's the one, it's her voice. She's got this British accent, and she's the one who tells me who you'll have a relationship with next. And she giggles. And she's no angel. She's no angel, that's an ET. That's one of them. So I have this relationship that I've been in now for 3 years. I'm hoping it's my last one. I think they're done with that study, I hope.
Is he good to you?
Very good to me. They picked him out. I was done when I ended that last relationship. I was in Texas, and it was time to end it. And I love the guy. I love him to death to this day, and he loves me. But it was just over. Time to move on. And we said goodbye. And I came back to Wisconsin, and I was like, that's it. I'm old. I'm an old one. I'm done. I just want to live alone. I'm tired. And I was getting ready one day. I love to dance. And I was going dancing with my girlfriend. And I texted her to say, what time are you going to be here? And she said, well, actually, my boyfriend's coming with. Is that okay? And I thought, nah. So I'm going to text her and I say, 3's a crowd. Go have a good time. I'm not going to go. but my thumb wouldn't work. And I was like, why can't I do that? And I was like, and that's why I tried my finger. I'm like, and it wouldn't work. I would push the button and it didn't do it. And I know that. I know what that's them. And I'm like, what? And I threw the phone down. And she said, you're going to meet someone. You need to go. And then she giggles. And I said, I don't want to meet anybody. I'm tired. I don't want to I just ended a relationship that I didn't really want to end, but I'm not doing that. And she said, she just giggled. So I said, okay. So I said, I'm going to show you. So I finished getting ready, and I was putting on my shoes and I was strapping them on, bent down, and I heard her say, dear, don't you think you should put that picture of you and Marv away? That would not go very well when you bring home your new beau. She called it a new beau. And I looked and I said, I'm not bringing anybody home, and I'm not putting that picture away. And she said, I think you should. And I said, I'm not bringing anybody home. So then I get finished getting the shoes on, and I go outside to meet her. I'm going out my door, and as I open the door, she goes again, dear, turn around and look at your house. It's a bit messy, don't you think? Can you believe that? And I turn around and look, and there's like a newspaper on the floor, and there's some stuff on the counter. And I said, no, it's not. And I told you, I'm not bringing anybody home. I don't do that. I'm not like that. I'm not going to meet somebody and bring them home. So I go. It's 4th of July weekend. We go to the bar. It's a pier bar. And I step onto the pier and walk across. And I see him sitting there, looking out at the lake. And he turns and he looks at me, and I watch him watch me, and I think, oh, crap. He's so cute. So we've been together ever since. He did get me a ride home because it was like the band started at 4. He hung out with us all afternoon, and then we went to dinner, and it just seemed fine when he asked if he could take me home, so I let him give me a ride home, and we sat up all night and talked. So we were together ever since, but I had to tell him about the book because it was going to print. And I needed to choose my time carefully. Because once you say those words, alien abduction, you can't take them back. I tried that once. I was like, oh, I said alien abduction? Because, the look on their face, I was like, oh my God, I was mortified. It's like, I didn't mean that. So I waited till one night in the dark when we were laying in bed, and I couldn't see his face, and he couldn't see me. And I said, so I wrote a book, and he said, you did? And I said, yeah, it's getting published soon. And he said, really? What's it about? Now, I had tested the water the week previous. I told him, I said, I saw a flying saucer once. And he said, uh-huh, and he just went back to his burger. And I said, well, that's not a it's not a very good sign. Yeah. He's a Capricorn. He's very nuts and bolts. He's very pragmatic, just like me. I'm a Capricorn. I mean, he's very down to earth. So I thought, well, it's going to be what it's going to be. So I told him, I have contact with beings from other dimensions. And I just kind of eased into it. And, he's a smart guy. He asked questions. Thank God I couldn't see his face. And we talked most of the night. And he didn't run till morning. He was like, and before he left, he said, it's too bad, I could have really loved you. And I turned to my dog, Pookie, and I said, well, I think that's the last we saw of him. But then I thought about my angel, Agnes, how she had pushed for me to be with him. So 3 days later, I get a really beautiful email card from him, and he says, I don't know anything about that subject, and I know enough about you to know that, you're not crazy, and maybe there's something here I can learn. And then he said, as a matter of fact, I think you can teach me things I don't even know I don't know. And
Cool.
Yeah. So he came back, and it was just in time because my guys were active in my life. It had, they'd been being careful because it wasn't too long. I went with my guys. I don't go with them so much on the ship physically anymore like I used to when I was younger. I go more in my astral body, which I used to not believe that happened. I used to scoff at people who said that's how they go. But that's what I do. It's a lot easier. But this night I went with them physically, and they must have wanted this to happen because as I crawled back into bed, I was cold, and I was cold from being on the ship with him. And I snuggled up to him and I woke him up, which also must have been part of the plan because otherwise they keep you in that stupor. And he came awake, and he got up, and he stumbled out to the great room to use the bathroom. And I heard him go, "Holy cripes, the hell is that?" And I started to laugh, and he goes, "Sherry, you gotta come look at this. Your neighbors, that's ridiculous. You should see the lights they have on their house." And he said, and he was mumbling out there, and I'm just laughing. I just want to go to sleep. And he's like, just mumbling, and he goes, "That's just ridiculous. You gotta report them." He said, "We're gonna go talk to them tomorrow." He said, "It's like goddamn runway lights." He said, "That's just crazy." He was going on, and I was like, "Just go to bed." And so he went, used the bathroom, came to bed. In the morning, he got up, and I said, "So show me which of my neighbors has the runway lights." And he said, "Oh yeah, that's right." And he walked to the front window, and he said, and then he stepped here, and he stepped there, and he went back and forth. And he went into the library, and he goes, "No, I never went into the library." And then he came back out, and he goes, "I don't get it. The house, it was right there." He said, "It was right to the right of that tree, but there's no..." And then he turned, and he goes, "Wait a minute." Because I'm laughing, I couldn't help it. And he said, "Did I see a UFO?" And I said, "You did." And he goes, "Oh, man, that was awesome." He said, "Okay." He said, "I'm ready." He said, "I want to meet your guys." And I said, "Okay." He said, I've had a lot of people ask to meet my guys, and sometimes they oblige and sometimes not. So I went to Don, I asked him, I said, "Can Jim meet you?" And he said, "Not now, he's not ready, perhaps later." And so I took that back to Jim, and I told him that, and he didn't like that. He said, "What does that mean, I'm not ready?" And I said, I don't know. It just means you're not ready for whatever reason. 3 months later, I'm out dancing with my girlfriend, and he's refereeing a high school football game 24 miles north of me. And he's coming back to my house at about, I don't know, I suppose 11 o'clock or so. I get home at midnight, and he's sitting in the dark in my house. And as soon as I walked in, I knew something was up because he's sitting over there in the dark. And I turn on the light, and he's got this look on his face. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I don't understand how I got home tonight." He said, I'm trying to figure out what happened." And so I talked to him about it, and I said, "Let's just go over this in the morning." So we went over it in the morning, and he was coming down to my house, and it was all planned because he was coming down 92, which had new surface on it, so he knew he was on Highway 92. It's a really fun road to drive with the new blacktop on it. It's nice and curvy. And I said, "Do you remember where you were?" And he said, "Well, I went past a road that had a funny name. It started with an M, and it was really long." And I said, "Messerschmitt?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, that's what I went through. He said, "It had a lot of S's in it." He said, "For some reason I noticed that sign." He said, "And right after I saw that, I saw eyes, deer eyes." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, they were lime green." And I said, "Lime green, deer eyes, okay." "Yeah," and he said, "They had vertical slits." And I said, "Okay." Because, but I know that's how you are. I mean, you're like, "Yes, yeah, they were deer eyes." And I was like, and he said, "They were huge." And he said, and I saw them, and I thought, I gotta go back and look at them. He said, "But now I can't remember. Did I turn around and go back?" But he said, "The car stopped, but I don't remember stopping the car." And he's doing all that stuff that we all are familiar with. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm pretty sure that was an abduction, but I'm thinking, my guys don't have lime green eyes. So we're sitting there, and I said, "It sounds like you had an encounter." And he said, "What?" Because he had to turn on his GPS to find my house, because that's the last thing he remembered, seeing those eyes. And then the next thing is he's way over on the other side of this little community, and he's driving through the back roads, and he has no idea where he is. So when he comes to my house, he comes from the opposite direction. He comes from the west, heading east, and there's no way he should have been over there. But when they set him free, that's the way he went. So he had to punch the GPS to find his way. So he knew he came into my development from the other direction. And I said, "I think you had an experience. And as soon as I said that, I heard him say, meet and greet. And I said, come on. And I said, they just told me they did a meet and greet. And he said, what? And I said, yeah, they're calling it a meet and greet. I said, and he said, why? And I said, and then they said indoctrination. I think I have a slide for this. Nope, oops. Oh, yeah, indoctrination. And he said, well, what does that mean? I mean, we know what indoctrination means. But when he said, what does that mean? They said, look it up, which they say that a lot. So I went and got the dictionary and I looked it up. And when they tell me to look something up, if there's multiple meanings, the one that they want you to focus on is the one that they put it in bold. I don't know how they do that, but I see it in bold. To train to accept a system of thought uncritically. They wanted him to be on board with my experiences. He would have been long gone by now otherwise. If he would not have shared, if he would have not seen the UFO, if he would have just been on the fringe, and the most he experienced was me talking to them sometimes at night. He hears me talking to him. But him having his own meet and greet, that was huge. So they indoctrinated him. Then they showed me his encounter, that movie screen. And they showed it to me from up high, looking down at his car. His car was facing the wrong direction, and it was in the wrong lane of traffic, and it was coming down, and it was up against a guardrail on a big sweeping curve. And there were 3 guys there, 3 ETs, and as they came toward the car, they barely grabbed the handle when Jim went ahead and opened the door himself. Totally no fear. He got out just like he was greeting long-lost relatives. I mean, I thought he was going to hug them. He was totally fearless with it. And they wanted me to see that. Then I got to thinking about the lime green eyes. And I said, it's not adding up. I don't know, this is not adding up. So then they showed it to me again. And this time I focused on the ETs. And I saw, that's not my guys. That's not at all my guys. And then they showed it to me immediately again afterwards. And I'm looking, and it's the Dracos. I'm like, oh crap, what have we done now? You know, but then they showed it to me a 4th time, and they said, you see, there is no fear. And so I said, okay, because what I remembered was several months prior to this encounter that he had with the Dracos, I've had Dracos come into my house in the past. I'm aware of them. You can feel them. You can feel them. I don't really have any fear of them unless when they scan you, you know, I don't like it when they scan me without permission. But I had an incident where I woke up in the middle of the night and I was aware that there was someone nearby. So I got out of bed, and I must have known. I knew because I went straight into my bathroom, and in my bathroom I have windows that go from the ceiling down to the top of the jacuzzi. And I knew right where to look. I looked out that window, and under the birch tree, standing about 4'7", is a Draco. The moon was bright that night. I could see him, especially the more I stood there, the more my eyes got used to it. And I saw him standing there. So I looked at the clock, and it was like 2 or 4 minutes after 2. And so I rubbed my arm, because I've learned how to do that. And I rubbed my arm. I'm like, yep, you're awake. And I looked at myself. I'm like, yep, you're awake, you're awake. And I'm looking, and you're looking at a Draco. It's 2:04 in the morning, and so I'm looking at him. And he asked permission to scan me, and I said, sure. And when they scan you, they start at the top of your head. I don't know if any of you have had that. And it's like a buzz, and you can feel a vibration, and it goes through you, and it goes, and it clicks down through you until they get to a certain point, and then they stop. I looked at him, and all I could feel was love. I swear I felt more love for him than I ever felt for my own children. Something was going on that night. I'm thinking that I had been asked to enter into a contract to work with the Dracos. There is a group of them that are wanting to take advantage of this time during the Stargate opening to move into a higher frequency. And this group of Dracos wanted to know if they could do service to others, and we'd be participants in that. They were tired of being service to self. You can only evolve so far being service to self. You can only go so far up the ladder. You can't go beyond you can't go beyond the fifth dimension for sure. It's tough to be in the fifth dimension, and you know, you can get so far into it, but you can't stay service to self. You have to, because love is still the same, whether it's love of yourself to the exclusion of others or love of others, but love of only yourself and not of others will eventually create problems. So you can only ascend so far. So these guys were ready to move on and move out of that, and they were done playing the role of the bad guy. So I agreed to that contract that night, and I projected love. I extended love to him, huge amounts of love to him, and he was like a sponge just soaking it up. I mean, that's what I remember, is him just standing there, just experiencing love.
Him being Jim or him being the Draco?
Him being the Draco.
Okay.
And I was going to stand there for 10 minutes and do that, but I got bored and went back to bed after 8 minutes. And the next morning when I woke up, I jumped out of bed, literally jumped out of bed, and I went, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what did I do? Oh my God, there was a Draco here. He was standing right there, 15 feet from my bed, on the other side of my screen door. What was I thinking going back to bed? And I heard Da say, Sherry, you would judge this? And I said, well, they're bad guys, right? Aren't they evil? And he said, you would judge this? And I said, well, no. And he said, I said, don't I have to be cautious? Can't they do me harm? And he said, dear, you long ago surpassed that frequency. Stand in the truth of who you are. They can't touch you. Get off of that one. So when I found out that Jim had his encounter with the Dracos, I reflected back on that, and I thought, okay, Jim wasn't afraid of them, and as long as we keep our vibration high, we're good with this. So we continued to have contact with them. They continued to come to the house, and we would be very much aware of them. They're not near as smooth as my guys. They don't put you in an altered state, they just wait for you to go to sleep. And more than once, Jim will be laying there and he'll go, oh, cripes. Somebody's playing with my feet. And I'm like, what? And he's like, somebody's touching my feet. And I'll be like, oh yeah, me too. He's like, well, what's going on? And I would say, well, it's the Dracos are giving us Reiki. And he's like, yeah, that's just creepy. Can't they wait till we're asleep? And I said, well, apparently not. Because you can feel them, but you can't always see them. Sometimes you can see them, sometimes you can't. It's even creepier when they do it on your head. I've had them do it on my head, and I'm like, guys, I'm not asleep yet. You know, but it feels really good. And they're doing healing modalities. And they were giving me amino acid shots back when I was getting sick, and I knew something was wrong with me, but I didn't know what. They were coming in because in the morning, Jim and I would both wake up, and I'd be like, why is my back itching? And I would say, would you look here? Did something bite me? But every morning it was the same place. And he was like, that's weird because I got the same thing. I looked at him, and then you could see the 3-prong injection site. And I said, oh, you've been injected with something. And he said, what? And he said, who's doing that? And what are they injecting? And I said, I don't know. And I heard him say amino acids. And I just cleared the house of everyone and everything. and I needed to do that. So I feel bad about it. But my guys were staying away while I was working with the Dracos, and I'm extremely happy to have my guys back again now. And the Dracos can find someone else to work with. I don't think that it had anything to do with them, but I think that the powers that be, the controllers of the planet, have been warned, and I've been told that I should not be talking about the things I'm talking about. And so that's not to put fear. The more of us who talk about it, the more safe we will be. And I'm not going to stop talking about it. Matter of fact, it'll make me talk more. And, you know, I think that they know that if they go too far, if they make a martyr out of me, that's not going to help their cause either. So someone asked if the planet was in a war. Is there a war for planet Earth? There's a war for your soul. There's a war on for the souls of planet Earth to try to keep as many here as possible. Planet Earth, as she is now, is not going to survive much longer. In the 3 dimension, you have all the pollutants, all the damage that's done. That's all real in this dimension. In the 5th dimension, you go to a frequency where that doesn't exist. Because in truth, the only thing that's real is love. That's what we are. That's what we were created by. And that's what we were created to be. So all this other stuff is just experiences that we created for ourselves to experience otherness, so that we could be like, I wonder what it's like to not have love all the time in our life. What's it like to experience something called evil? That's the experience we're having. And that's okay. It's just a game, but you don't want to stay in it for very long, because you can get stuck. You can get stuck for, in linear time, you can stay stuck for millions of years. And your soul, your higher self, is wanting you to move out of this frequency, out of this dimension, and move and reunite with your higher self and with the other aspects of yourself. Because you're multidimensional. You have aspects, you know, we're all one. So you're not just this soul, this singular thing that's here in this time space. You're existing on many other frequencies. So, time-wise, it's a lot.
We're supposed to be out of here at 5, so it's
Okay.
like,
Okay.
I want to thank everybody, and thank you, Sherry.